Rejection. It's a word that carries weight, a heavy, undeniable sting. It feels personal, like an unseen hand pushing you away from something or someone you desperately hoped would accept you. For some, rejection becomes a wound that never quite heals. For others, it becomes a seed planted deep in fertile soil, waiting for the right season to bloom. Imagine standing in the pouring rain, clutching a letter with those cold, unfeeling words, "We regret to inform you." Or hearing the quiet finality in someone's voice as they say, "You're just not the right fit." It doesn't matter how the rejection comes, it always feels the same, like the ground has shifted beneath your feet, leaving you unsure where to step next. But what if rejection isn't the end of the story? What if it's the beginning of something far greater than you can see right now? There's an ancient metaphor that speaks of a stone rejected by builders. A stone deemed unworthy, out of place, useless. And yet, that same stone went on to become the chief cornerstone, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Sometimes, the thing others discard, overlook, or underestimate carries within it the potential for greatness. This isn't just an old proverb, it's a truth woven into the human experience. Think about the inventors, the artists, the thinkers, and the leaders who were once rejected. Their ideas were too bold, their visions too grand, their voices too loud for the world around them. But instead of letting rejection bury them, they let it refine them. They allowed rejection to push them deeper into their purpose. Take Emma, for example, the young woman with a dream of becoming a writer. Every submission letter she received came back with polite but crushing words, "Not what we're looking for." She questioned herself, doubted her talent, and nearly gave up entirely. But one night, as she sat surrounded by rejection letters, she realized something profound. These letters weren't telling her she wasn't good enough. They were telling her she wasn't meant to fit into someone else's mold. So Emma stopped chasing approval. She stopped trying to write stories she thought publishers wanted to hear. Instead, she wrote the story burning inside her, the one that felt impossible to ignore. And that story? It became a bestseller. The cornerstone of her legacy wasn't the praise she eventually received, it was the rejection that forced her to uncover her truest voice. Rejection isn't an ending, it's an unveiling. It strips away pretense, ego, and the need for shallow validation. It asks hard questions. What do you truly believe in? What are you willing to fight for? And it whispers a quiet truth. You are not defined by who accepts or rejects you, but by how you respond to both. If you've ever felt the sting of rejection, whether from a job, a relationship, or a dream, you're not alone. But hear this, rejection might just be your invitation to become the cornerstone of something extraordinary. So as we journey through this story together, let this be our foundation. Rejection doesn't have to be the final chapter. Sometimes it's just the first brick in the foundation of a legacy worth building. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And maybe, just maybe, you are that stone. Rejection has a way of making us question ourselves, our abilities, our dreams, even our worth. It creeps into our minds whispering lies. Maybe you're just not good enough. But what if rejection isn't about your worth at all? What if it's about your authenticity? When something or someone stands out, it's often met with resistance. The world tends to reject what it doesn't recognize, what doesn't neatly fit into its preconceived boxes. Authenticity, by its very nature, disrupts the status quo. It's raw, unapologetic, and undeniably real. But being authentic often comes with a cost. It sets you apart, and being set apart can feel lonely. Let's talk about David. He was a talented young musician, pouring his soul into every song he wrote. But time after time, record labels turned him down. Your sound is too different. You don't fit our image. The rejection letters piled up, and David began to shrink under their weight. One night, David sat alone with his guitar in his tiny, dimly lit apartment. His fingers hovered over the strings, but no music came. The silence felt heavy, suffocating. Then he noticed something. Every song he had written to please someone else felt hollow. The ones that felt alive, that stirred something deep within him, were the songs he wrote when no one was watching. That night, David made a choice. He would stop chasing approval. He would stop trying to sound like everyone else. He would lean fully into his authenticity, even if it meant facing more rejection. And when he finally shared his truest work with the world, something incredible happened. It resonated. People who felt unseen, unheard, and unappreciated found their voice in his music. Rejection doesn't point to inadequacy. It often points to uniqueness. The world rejected David not because he wasn't good enough, but because he wasn't ordinary enough. Authenticity is uncomfortable for those who value familiarity over growth, predictability over passion. You see, rejection doesn't measure your worth. It measures how well you fit into someone else's expectations. And if being yourself means you don't fit into a box someone else built, maybe that's not a box you were meant to be in. There's an undeniable courage in authenticity. It's the courage to say, "This is who I am," even if you don't approve. It's the bravery to keep showing up, even when every door seems to slam shut. But authenticity isn't just about how you show up in the world. It's about how you see yourself. When rejection comes, you have a choice. You can let it define you, or you can let it refine you. David's story isn't unique. Every great leader, artist, and visionary has faced rejection. Not because they lacked value, but because they dared to be different. And every single one of them had a moment where they had to decide, do I abandon my authenticity to gain acceptance? Or do I embrace my uniqueness, even if it means walking alone for a while? If you're facing rejection today, remember this. It's not about your worth. It's about your authenticity. The world might not recognize it immediately, but that doesn't mean it isn't valuable. Rejection is a filter, not a verdict. It separates what is fleeting from what is lasting, what is shallow from what is deep, and what is imitation from what is real. So, lean into who you are. Trust that your authenticity will find its place, not in a world of temporary applause, but in a space where it can build something timeless, something unshakable. Rejection reveals what is real. Authenticity doesn't beg to be accepted, it simply shines. And maybe, just maybe, your light is shining too brightly for some people to handle right now. But one day, they'll see it. Rejection has a way of echoing in our minds, repeating the same painful question. What's wrong with me? But the truth is, rejection often has little to do with you, and everything to do with how others perceive difference, how they process what they can't easily categorize or control. Imagine Sarah, a young architect with grand ideas. She wasn't content with simply designing buildings. She wanted to create spaces that told stories, places where people could feel connected to something greater than themselves. But every time she pitched her vision to clients, she was met with polite but dismissive words. Your ideas are too unconventional. We're looking for something more traditional. Sarah began to wonder if maybe she was the problem. Maybe her ideas were too far-fetched, too different. But late one evening, as she sat in her small studio staring at yet another rejection email, she realized something profound. The problem wasn't her ideas. It was their inability to see them. You see, people often reject what they don't understand. It's not because what you offer is unworthy, it's because it doesn't fit neatly into their expectations. The unfamiliar feels threatening. It challenges comfort zones and forces people to question what they've always accepted as normal. But difference isn't a weakness, it's a gift. It's the spark that ignites innovation, the ingredient that turns ordinary into extraordinary. And sometimes, the only way to protect that gift is to face rejection head-on, refusing to shrink yourself to fit someone else's limited perspective. Sarah didn't stop dreaming. She started working on smaller projects, places where she could let her creativity flow without compromise. Over time, her designs began to attract attention. Not from the traditional clients who once dismissed her, but from visionaries who understood her. Today, Sarah's designs are celebrated worldwide, not because she changed who she was, but because she stayed true to what made her different. Rejection often isn't personal. It's not about you being not enough, it's about others being not ready. It's about timing, perspective, and the human tendency to cling to familiarity. Think about it. Every groundbreaking idea, every revolutionary movement, every bold act of creativity was once met with rejection. The light bulb, the airplane, the smartphone, none of them were immediately embraced. They were seen as foolish, unnecessary, or even impossible. But rejection didn't stop their creators, and it shouldn't stop you. When rejection comes, instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" try asking, "What makes me different?" Because in that difference lies your strength. In that difference lies your purpose. It's easy to see rejection as a closed door, but sometimes it's more like a detour, a redirection towards where you're truly meant to be. Sarah didn't build her legacy by fitting into someone else's blueprint. She built it by daring to draw her own. There's a raw courage in being different. It requires vulnerability, persistence, and an unshakable belief in your vision. And yes, it often means walking a lonelier path. But here's the thing about walking a different path. It often leads to places no one else has ever been before. So if you find yourself facing rejection because you're different, hold your head high. Because the world doesn't need more of the same. It doesn't need more conformity, more predictability, more repetition. It needs you. It needs your voice, your ideas, your unique perspective. And while not everyone will understand you, not everyone will embrace what you bring, that doesn't mean your contribution isn't valuable. It doesn't mean you're not enough. Rejection doesn't define you. Your response to it does. So keep showing up. Keep being different. Keep being you. Because someday, the very thing that made you feel rejected might just be the cornerstone of something extraordinary. Sometimes rejection isn't about who you are. It's about what they can't yet see, and one day, they'll see it. Rejection often feels like a locked door, a barrier preventing you from reaching something you deeply desire. But what if that door was never meant to open in the first place? What if rejection isn't a punishment, but a redirection? A way of steering you away from flawed plans and toward something far greater than you could have imagined. Meet James. He had spent years working at a corporate job he didn't love, chasing a promotion that always seemed just out of reach. He poured his energy, his time, and even his health into proving his worth. But when the promotion finally came up, the opportunity went to someone else. James felt hollow. He had done everything right, stayed late, sacrificed weekends, delivered results. And yet, he was still overlooked. The rejection stung deep, leaving him questioning every choice he had made up to that point. One evening, while staring at the rejection email glowing on his laptop screen, James did something he hadn't done in years. He allowed himself to dream. For as long as he could remember, James had loved woodworking. It was his escape, his therapy, a quiet space where the noise of the world faded away and his hands brought beauty to life. But woodworking had always been a hobby, something relegated to weekends, if he had the time. With no promotion to chase and no urgent deadlines looming, James picked up his tools again. At first, it was just to clear his mind, but soon he began creating furniture. Pieces so exquisite, they felt like they had stories carved into them. He posted a few photos of his work online, not expecting much. But within weeks, the orders started pouring in. People weren't just buying furniture, they were investing in craftsmanship, in something real, something made with intention. James realized something profound. The rejection he had received wasn't the end of his worth. It was the beginning of his freedom. The job he had clung to so tightly wasn't his true calling. It was a comfortable cage. Sometimes rejection is a forceful shove out of a place you were never meant to stay. It's the universe, or perhaps something divine, saying, "There's something better for you, but you have to let go of this first." Rejection doesn't just close doors, it opens new ones. Ones you might never have noticed if you were still fixated on the old ones. We cling to plans because they feel safe. They give us structure, predictability, and a sense of control. But sometimes those plans are too small for the size of our purpose. James thought his corporate promotion was the pinnacle of success. But his rejection freed him to discover a calling that brought him deep satisfaction, purpose, and yes, even financial success. If he had received that promotion, he might have spent the next 20 years climbing a ladder propped against the wrong wall. Rejection has a way of cutting away the unnecessary, the superficial, the distractions. It forces you to pause, reassess, and ask yourself hard questions. Was this really the path I was meant to walk? Was this really what I wanted? Sometimes the only way to find your true path is to lose sight of the one you were so sure about. And that loss? It hurts. It feels like failure. But often it's grace in disguise, a gift wrapped in thorns. If you've ever been rejected from a job, a relationship, or a dream you held close, consider this. Maybe it wasn't meant for you. Maybe it was limiting you, confining you, holding you back from becoming who you were truly meant to be. James's story isn't about furniture. It's about freedom. It's about the courage to let go of what's comfortable and step into what's possible. Rejection isn't always a closed door. Sometimes it's a broken chain. So if you find yourself standing in the aftermath of rejection, take a deep breath. Look around, because somewhere nearby a door is opening, a door that leads to something better, something truer, something yours. Sometimes rejection isn't the end of the plan. It's the end of the wrong plan. And the right plan, it's waiting for you. Rejection at its core often isn't about you. It's about fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of change. Fear of losing control. People reject what they don't understand, and more often than not, they reject what challenges their sense of security. Think about it. How many great ideas were dismissed because they felt too risky? How many relationships ended before they began because someone was too afraid to be vulnerable? Fear wears many masks, but rejection is one of its favorites. Take Mia, a young teacher with a heart overflowing with passion for her students. She didn't just teach, she invested. Her classroom was a safe space, a place where shy kids found their voice and struggling kids found hope. But when Mia proposed a bold new teaching method to the school board, one focused on creativity over standardized testing, her idea was met with resistance. The room grew heavy with skeptical glances, furrowed brows, and murmurs of, "That's not how we've always done it." One member spoke up. "What if it fails? What if the test scores drop? We can't take that risk." Fear. It wasn't that Mia's idea was bad. It wasn't that she wasn't qualified, or that her passion wasn't genuine. It was simply that her idea represented change. And change is terrifying for those who have grown comfortable in predictability. Mia left the meeting with a hollow ache in her chest. Doubt crept in. Was I wrong? Did I overstep? But deep down, she knew the truth. Their rejection wasn't about her. It was about their fear of stepping into the unknown. Fear and rejection often hold hands, walking side by side in boardrooms, classrooms, and relationships. And while rejection stings, it's fear that keeps us trapped. Fear builds invisible walls, convincing us that staying in the familiar, even if it's flawed, is better than stepping into uncertainty. But here's the thing. Everything extraordinary exists beyond fear. Mia didn't let fear win. She didn't abandon her idea, nor did she let the rejection define her. Instead, she started small. She implemented her teaching method in her own classroom, one lesson at a time. Slowly, her students began to thrive. Confidence replaced anxiety, curiosity replaced boredom, and their results spoke louder than any school board meeting ever could. Eventually, word spread. Other teachers began observing Mia's classroom, parents started asking questions, and finally, the same school board that once rejected her idea came back with different words. "Can you show us how you did it?" Rejection fueled by fear isn't about your failure. It's about their hesitance. It's about their inability to see what you see, to feel what you feel, to believe in what you know to be true. But fear doesn't have to have the final say. If you faced rejection rooted in someone else's fear, don't carry their fear as your own. Don't let their hesitation become your roadblock. Fear isn't just external. It's internal too. Sometimes we are the ones rejecting our own ideas, our own dreams, because we're afraid of failure, embarrassment, or disappointment. But here's the truth. Failure isn't the enemy. Fear is. Fear will keep you in places you've outgrown. Fear will silence your voice. Fear will convince you that rejection means you should stop trying. But what if Mia had stopped? What if she had let that meeting extinguish her passion? The lives she changed, the students she inspired, it all would have been lost to fear. So, if you find yourself standing in the shadow of rejection, ask yourself, is this about me, or is it about fear? And if it's fear, whether yours or someone else's, know this: fear is a liar. It tells you that failure is final. It tells you that rejection is the end. But it's not. Rejection, even when wrapped in fear, can still be a doorway. A doorway to growth, a doorway to resilience, a doorway to something better. Fear may be loud, but courage doesn't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes it's a quiet whisper that says, "Try again, one more step, don't give up." Rejection rooted in fear isn't the end of your story. It's just a plot twist, a chance to rise above someone else's doubts and prove, first to yourself and then to the world, that courage doesn't need permission to show up. Fear may sit at the table, but it doesn't have to get the final word. And neither does rejection. Rejection feels sharp. It cuts deep, leaving behind wounds that ache long after the moment has passed. But what if those cuts aren't just wounds? What if they're chisels, carving away the unnecessary, shaping you into something stronger, something sharper, something ready? You see, diamonds don't shine until they've been cut. Steel isn't strong until it's been forged in fire. And character isn't refined until it's been tested by rejection. Take Alex, a young entrepreneur with a mind bursting with ideas. He had poured his savings, time, and heart into his startup, a business he believed could change lives. He knocked on door after door, pitching his product with relentless enthusiasm. But every door felt like it slammed shut. Investors turned him down. Friends gently advised him to move on to something more stable. His confidence began to erode under the weight of repeated no's. One night, Alex sat alone in his tiny office, the silence heavy around him. Rejection had worn him thin, and he questioned whether he had anything left to give. But as he stared at his reflection in the window, a realization struck him. Every rejection had taught him something. The first investor's rejection had forced him to clarify his message. The second had pushed him to refine his product. The third had driven him to learn better negotiation tactics. Rejection wasn't just happening to him, it was happening for him. Like sandpaper against raw wood, rejection was smoothing out his rough edges. It was sharpening his focus, refining his strategy, and teaching him resilience. Slowly, Alex began to see rejection not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Every great leader, artist, and visionary shares a common story. Rejection didn't break them, it shaped them. It exposed weaknesses, yes, but only so those weaknesses could be fortified. It revealed blind spots, yes, but only so they could see more clearly. In Alex's case, rejection didn't stop him, it refined him. After countless adjustments, tweaks, and painful lessons, he finally pitched his idea to the right investor. And this time, the door opened. But the truth is, it wasn't just about that final investor. It was about the journey, the sharpening, the refining, the becoming. Rejection is a process, much like fire refining gold or pressure creating diamonds. It doesn't feel pleasant in the moment, but it serves a purpose. It's easy to resent rejection. It's easy to let it make you bitter, to carry its weight like an anchor tied to your spirit. But those who rise above it understand something profound. Rejection is training. It's training you to stand taller, to think sharper, to believe deeper. When you're rejected, you face a choice. Let it make you smaller, or let it make you stronger. Alex's story isn't just about a business deal, it's about endurance. It's about refusing to let rejection define him, and instead allowing it to refine him. And here's the thing, the same can be true for you. Rejection will come. It's inevitable. But whether it weakens you or strengthens you depends on how you respond. Do you let it close you off, or do you let it push you forward? The world doesn't need more people who crumble under rejection. It needs people who rise from it, stronger, wiser, and more determined than before. Every no can be a stepping stone. Every setback can be a setup for growth. So the next time rejection cuts you, remember this: you are being refined. You are being sharpened. You are being prepared for something greater than you can see right now. And one day, you'll look back on those rejections, not with resentment, but with gratitude. Because without them, you wouldn't be who you are becoming. Rejection isn't the end of your strength, it's the beginning of it. And if you let it, rejection won't break you, it will build you. Rejection often feels isolating. When doors close, when voices dismiss, and when opportunities slip away, it can feel like you've been pushed to the margins, left out of the room where decisions are made. But what if that isolation isn't punishment? What if being set apart is actually preparation, a refining season designed to shape you into a leader? Leadership isn't born in crowds. It's born in the quiet places, in the unseen moments, in the seasons of being set apart. Let me tell you about Olivia. She was passionate about community service, spending countless weekends organizing local outreach programs and helping families in need. She had vision, she had heart, and she had an unshakable belief that she could make a difference. But when a leadership position opened up at her organization, one she had worked tirelessly for, Olivia was passed over. The committee chose someone else, someone with a more polished resume and a louder presence. The rejection hit hard. Olivia felt invisible, overlooked, and undervalued. She spent weeks replaying the decision in her mind, wondering if she had done something wrong. But then something shifted. One quiet afternoon, while packing food boxes in the back of the community center, Olivia noticed something. She wasn't alone. A group of young volunteers had gathered around her, asking questions, seeking advice, and looking to her for guidance. In that moment, Olivia realized something profound. Leadership isn't about titles, it's about influence. While she hadn't been chosen for the official role, she was still leading. She was still impacting lives, still inspiring change. And maybe, just maybe, she had been set apart not to fit into someone else's role, but to create her own. Being set apart often feels like rejection because it's lonely, it's uncomfortable. But those seasons of isolation are where leaders are forged. Think about it. Moses spent years in the wilderness before leading a nation. Nelson Mandela spent decades in prison before uniting a divided country. Even great inventors and thinkers often worked alone, misunderstood, and rejected before the world recognized their contributions. Being set apart isn't rejection, it's refinement. It's a space where you learn resilience, develop vision, and build character. Sometimes being left out of the crowd means you're being positioned to lead the crowd. Olivia eventually started her own community initiative, a grassroots organization focused on empowering young people to serve their neighborhoods. The impact was undeniable. Families were supported, young leaders were raised, and her small idea grew into something far beyond what she had imagined. One day, the same organization that had overlooked her invited her back, not as a volunteer, but as a consultant to help reshape their outreach strategy. But Olivia wasn't bitter. She wasn't angry, because she understood now that the rejection she once felt wasn't a detour. It was a redirection. Being set apart doesn't mean you're unworthy. It means you're being prepared. It means there are lessons you need to learn, skills you need to develop, and a vision you need to protect before stepping into your next season. It's easy to resent the seasons of isolation. It's easy to feel like you're falling behind while others are moving ahead. But growth often happens in hidden places. Seeds don't sprout in the spotlight. They grow in the dark soil, unseen and unnoticed, until they're strong enough to rise above the surface. If you've ever felt overlooked or pushed aside, take heart. Sometimes the very reason you were set apart is because you were meant to build something different. Something lasting. Something that doesn't just fit into someone else's blueprint, but creates a blueprint of its own. Olivia's story isn't just about leadership. It's about perspective. When the world says you're being left out, perhaps God is saying you're being set apart. So don't mistake your season of preparation for permanent rejection. Don't assume that being overlooked means you've been forgotten. Sometimes, the best leaders are the ones who spent time in the wilderness. The ones who didn't rush the process. The ones who let rejection refine them and being set apart prepare them. You're not being rejected, you're being positioned. So stand tall in your season of being set apart. Pay attention to what you're learning, who you're becoming, and where you're being called. Because when the time comes, and it will, you'll realize that every moment of rejection was building you into the leader you were always meant to be. Rejection often feels final, like a door slamming shut with an echo that lingers. But what if that door wasn't closed because you weren't good enough? What if it was closed because the people on the other side couldn't see what you see? Rejection doesn't always reveal your limitations. It often reveals theirs. Their inability to see your vision, their resistance to change, their fear of stepping into unfamiliar territory. Take Nathan, a young scientist with an idea that could revolutionize renewable energy. His research was bold, his experiments innovative, and his belief unwavering. He presented his findings to industry leaders, expecting excitement, maybe even celebration. But instead, he was met with skepticism. This seems unrealistic. The risks are too high. Why fix something that isn't broken? Nathan left the meeting deflated. He had poured years of his life into this idea, and yet those in positions of power couldn't or wouldn't see its potential. For weeks, he replayed their words in his mind. He questioned himself. Were they right? Was I foolish to believe this could work? But then, in a moment of clarity, Nathan realized something. Their rejection wasn't about his idea, it was about their inability to understand it. They couldn't see what he could see because their perspective was limited by their fears, their biases, and their comfort with the status quo. Rejection often happens because people can't see beyond their own experiences. They can't grasp what hasn't been proven, what hasn't been done before. But visionaries, people like Nathan, see before others believe. Nathan decided he wouldn't let their blind spots become his barriers. He took his research elsewhere, finding smaller investors who believed in his vision. Slowly, brick by brick, he built something extraordinary. His technology didn't just succeed, it transformed entire communities, providing clean, sustainable energy to places that had once been left in the dark. Years later, some of the same leaders who had once dismissed him came knocking on his door, eager to collaborate. But here's the thing. Nathan's success wasn't born from their approval. It was born from his determination to see what they couldn't. Rejection often exposes limited perspectives. Not everyone will understand your vision. Not everyone will see your worth. And that's okay, because their inability to see it doesn't make it any less real. Imagine if every great inventor, artist, or leader had stopped at the first rejection. Imagine if they had let someone else's blind spots define their path. The world would be missing some of its greatest advancements, its most beautiful art, its most meaningful movements. Rejection isn't always a reflection of your potential. Sometimes it's a reflection of someone else's limitations. But here's the empowering truth. Their limitations don't have to become your own. You have a choice. You can internalize their doubts, or you can rise above them. You can let their rejection build a wall, or you can let it build a bridge to the people, places, and opportunities that do see your potential. Nathan's story isn't just about science, it's about persistence. It's about refusing to let someone else's blind spots become the lens through which he saw himself. If you've ever felt rejected because someone couldn't see your worth, your talent, or your vision, know this: their perspective isn't the final word. You are not limited by what they can't see. Sometimes rejection is simply an opportunity to find people who can see, people who will celebrate your vision, support your dreams, and walk alongside you as you build something extraordinary. The world is full of blind spots, but your job isn't to convince everyone to see. It's to keep walking, keep building, and keep believing in what you see. Because visionaries aren't remembered for fitting into others' expectations. They're remembered for breaking them. Rejection might reveal someone else's blind spots, but it doesn't have to cloud your vision. So keep moving forward, keep seeing what others can't. And one day, they'll look back and realize they were wrong to turn you away. Rejection often feels like a harsh verdict, a resounding no that echoes in the corners of your mind. But what if rejection isn't a punishment? What if, instead of holding you back, it's actually protecting you? Protecting you from settling, from shrinking, from building a life on a foundation too small to hold your purpose. Because here's the truth. Mediocrity is comfortable. It's safe. It's the warm corner of a room where expectations are low and risks are minimal. But nothing extraordinary was ever born from comfort zones. Let me tell you about Clara. She was an artist, a talented one, with a portfolio brimming with vibrant colors and raw emotion. But every gallery she approached turned her away. Your style isn't commercial enough. This isn't what buyers are looking for right now. Each rejection chipped away at her confidence. And for a while, Clara considered compromising, changing her art to fit the mold, toning down her style to match the gallery's expectations. But late one night, surrounded by half-finished canvases and scattered brushes, she realized something. If she changed her art to please someone else, it wouldn't be her art anymore. So Clara made a bold decision. She stopped chasing approval from galleries that wanted something safe, something predictable. Instead, she poured her soul into her most ambitious piece yet, a sprawling mural on an abandoned building in her neighborhood. Word spread. People stopped to watch her paint, to ask questions, to take pictures. Her mural became more than just art. It became a symbol of resilience, of beauty rising from overlooked spaces. A local journalist wrote an article about Clara's mural, and soon after, an international art collector reached out. He wasn't looking for safe art, he was looking for authentic art. Clara's rejection wasn't blocking her from success, it was protecting her from mediocrity. It was keeping her from becoming just another artist blending into the crowd. Rejection often feels like loss, but sometimes it's divine protection. It's the universe, or perhaps something higher, saying, "This isn't your place. There's something better waiting for you." Think about it. How many times have we accepted less because we were afraid we wouldn't find more? How many times have we stayed in jobs, relationships, or situations that didn't fulfill us simply because they were good enough? But rejection, it pulls you out of good enough and sets you on a path toward greatness. Clara's story isn't unique. It's echoed in every person who's ever refused to settle. Every leader, every innovator, every artist who faced rejection and said, "I'd rather walk alone in my purpose than sit comfortably in someone else's expectation." Rejection strips away the illusions of false belonging. It removes the people, places, and opportunities that were never meant for you in the first place. If Clara had been accepted by those galleries, she might have spent her life creating watered-down versions of her talent, pieces designed to please others but empty of her soul. Instead, rejection set her free. So here's the lesson. Not every door is meant to open. Not every opportunity is meant to be yours. Sometimes the rejection you're facing isn't a barrier, it's a boundary. A loving, firm boundary, keeping you away from something that would have diminished you, diluted you, or distracted you from your true calling. It's easy to take rejection personally, to see it as proof of inadequacy, failure, or lack of worth. But what if you could see it differently? What if rejection isn't just a closed door? It's a locked gate keeping you from wandering into places where your light would be dimmed. Because you weren't made for mediocrity. You weren't made to blend in, to shrink down, or to settle for almost. You were made for purpose, for impact, for something that stretches you, challenges you, and fulfills you in ways mediocrity never could. So the next time rejection stares you down, take a step back, breathe, and remind yourself, this isn't blocking me, it's protecting me. Because sometimes rejection isn't the loss of an opportunity, it's the preservation of your purpose. Clara didn't need the gallery's approval to become the artist she was meant to be. And you don't need everyone's approval to step into your calling. Rejection isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of a better one. Sometimes, rejection saves you from building a life that's too small for your dreams. So don't settle. Don't shrink. And most importantly, don't stop. Because the world doesn't need more people settling into mediocrity. It needs more people like you, daring to create something extraordinary. Rejection. By now, we've seen it as a teacher, a refiner, a protector, and a guide. But at its deepest, most profound level, rejection is often a redirection, a way of steering you towards something you were always meant to do, somewhere you were always meant to be. There's an old saying, sometimes you don't get what you want because you deserve something better. And while those words are easy to say, they're hard to believe when you're standing in the middle of disappointment. Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus was a talented public speaker with a passion for helping others find purpose in their lives. He had a gift. His voice could stir something deep within a crowd. When he spoke, people didn't just hear him, they felt him. He applied for a position at a prestigious leadership organization, a dream role that promised influence, stability, and a national platform to inspire others. But after months of interviews and anticipation, the email came. We've decided to move forward with another candidate. Marcus felt gutted. He had poured his heart into every interview, every essay, every presentation. For days, he walked around in a fog of disappointment. One evening, while scrolling aimlessly through social media, Marcus noticed a post about a struggling community center in a forgotten corner of his city. They were looking for volunteers to help with a youth mentorship program. It wasn't glamorous. There were no spotlights, no national platforms, no high-profile events. Just a dusty room filled with foldable chairs and kids who desperately needed someone to believe in them. Marcus hesitated. His ego whispered, "This isn't what you worked so hard for. You're meant for something bigger." But something deeper, something quieter, urged him to show up. He started small, mentoring one teenager, then two. Word spread, and soon Marcus was leading weekly workshops. Kids who had been written off as troubled began showing progress. Grades improved, attitudes shifted, and hope sparked where it had been extinguished. Years later, One of those teenagers, now a young adult, introduced Marcus at an event honoring his contribution to the community. With tears in his eyes, the young man said, "Because of Marcus, I believed in myself. And because of that, I'm standing here today." The audience erupted in applause, but Marcus could only think of one thing. If I had gotten that dream job, I would have missed this. Rejection isn't random. It isn't meaningless. Sometimes it's the universe, or God, or fate, gently closing one door so you'll notice another one that was always meant for you. Every rejection Marcus faced, every disappointment he endured, had been guiding him here, to this dusty room, to these kids, to this purpose. You see, our idea of success is often too small. We dream of platforms when we're called to build relationships. We chase titles when we're meant to chase impact. But rejection has a way of breaking down our small plans and pointing us toward bigger ones. Plans we couldn't have dreamed up ourselves. If you faced rejection recently, ask yourself this. What if this isn't a closed door, but a divine detour? Because here's the truth. Sometimes the thing you wanted most wasn't what you needed most. Sometimes the no you received was clearing space for the yes that's coming. Every rejection carries a choice. You can let it make you bitter, or you can let it make you better. Marcus's story reminds us of something powerful. The rejection he felt wasn't the end of his path. It was a bend in the road, leading him somewhere deeper, richer, and more meaningful. And your story? It's still unfolding. The rejections you faced, the doors that have closed, the people who have walked away, they're all part of a bigger picture. A picture you might not see clearly yet, but one that's being painted with purpose. So if you're standing in the middle of rejection today, hold on. Trust the timing. Trust the process. Because sometimes rejection isn't a curse, it's a compass. It's pointing you toward a purpose so profound, so impactful, that one day you'll look back and say, if I hadn't been rejected, I wouldn't be here. You might not understand it now. It might still sting, and it might still hurt. But one day, clarity will come. One day, you'll see that the rejection you faced wasn't punishment. It was preparation. It was protection. It was guidance. Sometimes, rejection isn't the end of your dream. It's the beginning of your destiny. Keep walking, keep trusting, keep believing, because your purpose is still ahead, and rejection was just the signpost pointing you in the right direction.